Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong. As you come in, please do hit the like button. We have a huge show today and three of personal heroes and people I admire and huge voices in this cause of peace are coming on in just a minute. So do hit that like button as we begin here. But we have to ask the question, is this capitulation, humiliation, or something a lot worse? Israel is saying that it has been blindsided and is panicking after Donald Trump announced that the United States is halting its bombing campaign on Yemen in exchange for a pause on attacks on American shipping. But even as Trump claimed that this deal was done, a second F-18 jet in just a matter of 2 weeks has sunk to the bottom of the Red Sea, officially being blamed on mechanical failure. However, many believe, and now it has been announced, that Ansar Allah had forced the USS Truman into, once again, evasive maneuvers that dropped the plane. The truth, though, is that Yemen has humiliated Israel with its missile strike on Ben Gurion Airport, and its repeated confrontations with the U.S. aircraft carrier USS Truman has Trump tapping out for now. But it's far from over. Trump is talking to Netanyahu about a U.S. takeover of Gaza's political administration as Israel prepares a full-scale occupation of its genocidal campaign in Gaza. Hamas and the resistance is saying no, launching Operation Gates of Hell, demonstrating that the Palestinian people are not going out without a fight. And this isn't to mention that the conflict between Pakistan and India, that Israel is supporting, the U.S. is supporting on the Indian side, is set to send shockwaves through the region too. But to discuss all this and more, we have three very special guests. We have friend of the show, frequent guest, Professor Mohammad Marandi, joining from Iran. Thank you so much, Professor, once again for joining me today. All right. And then we have Ali Abunimah, who is the chief editor of Electronic Intifada, a great publication everyone should follow. Ali, thanks so much for joining today.
Thank you.
And then we have Lowkey, a rapper, activist, intellectual, and just someone I've admired for many years. Lowkey, thank you so much for joining again today.
Thank you for having me, Danny.
So maybe I'll just kick it to you, Professor Marandi, to just react to this, because we have here, I'll just pull up what Donald Trump had to say about this deal with Ansar Allah, saying that there has been a capitulation by Ansar Allah itself, that they'll stop attacks on American shipping, that they're giving up. Here we go.
We had some very good news last night. The Houthis have announced that they are not, or they've been announced to us at least, that they don't want to fight anymore. They just don't want to fight. And we will honor that. And we will stop the bombings. And they have capitulated. But more importantly, we will take their word. They say they will not be blowing up ships anymore.
And then, as that was happening, we had the announcement about the downing or the sinking of another fighter jet. The U.S. has lost another F-18 Super Hornet off the USS Harry Truman. It has sunk to the bottom of the Red Sea. All of this happening virtually at the same time, Professor Marandi. So what's your assessment? What is going on here? How does this fit into the larger picture that we've been covering?
Well, first of all, I think I have to congratulate you on your birthday. And your audience should know that it is your birthday. And so I think everyone should give an extra like today as a birthday gift. But after that, I think it's pretty clear that this is a significant setback for the United States. Trump, obviously, as he always does, he makes things up. I think it's quite clear that you have a very politically aware audience, and your two other guests are. I've noticed before that they're always more precise than me, and they know much more detail about events, so they could do a better job in explaining. But it's quite clear that Ansar Allah after the ceasefire, Netanyahu, he reimposed the starvation siege. And Ansar Allah gave a warning, stating that they gave him 4 days, maybe. Now you can correct me if I'm wrong, to open up the Gaza Strip to aid. Otherwise, we're going to shut down the Red Sea again. So they even gave the Israeli regime and Netanyahu time to rethink the siege. They did not change their policy, and Ansarullah restarted their siege on Israeli regime ports. So the siege had nothing to do with American ships. It had nothing to do with European ships. It had nothing to do with any ships that were not related to the Israeli regime. Now, the Americans, Trump, decided to teach everyone a lesson and teach Ansarullah a lesson. And he and his Secretary of Defense made it clear that they're going to finish the job and get rid of Ansarullah. And for the last few weeks, that's what they've been trying to do. We saw a large number of very expensive drones downed, very important drones. Those are the drones that are used to find and immediately target commanders, sensitive equipment. They, in my opinion, they're even more important than the F-18s, because the F-18s have to take off, go to Yemen, bomb a particular site. These drones, which are almost as expensive when they're fully armed as an F-18, they are constantly monitoring and seeking targets so that they can immediately strike them. So Ansarullah has been downing these drones. They've been downing these jets. They've been harassing ships during this period of time. The Americans have been constantly bombing. We saw from, I think, the Wall Street Journal article that their heavy bombings with B-2 and B-52 bombers coming all the way from Diego Garcia, which is very expensive, by the way, to carry out these bombing strikes. And since out of fear, the aircraft carriers in the Red Sea are also very far away from Yemen, the airstrikes from there are also expensive. So the Americans used those heavy bombers, the B-52s and B-2s, to bomb Yemeni military sites. The Wall Street Journal effectively admits that it was not successful. And the Americans, of course, and now the Israelis too, they basically bombed civilian targets and slaughtered ordinary people. They bombed factories. They bombed apartment blocks. But they had no success, and they could not stop the missiles. They could not stop the drones, and they obviously couldn't stop the missile that struck the Ben Gurion International Airport. So when Trump says Ansarullah, or what they call the Houthis, he says that Ansarullah has capitulated, in fact, he's capitulated. And Ansarullah, as we've gone back to where we were before Trump decided to attack Yemen. In other words, ships, as we speak, as before, Israeli ships are blocked from going to or leaving Israeli ports, and other shipping that is not related to the Israeli regime can go through the Red Sea as normal. So basically, Ansarullah has scored a major victory. The United States has been humiliated. Trump has been humiliated. And I think it also has broader significance, because that means it shows that there are times when the interest of the United States is not precisely the same as that of the Israeli regime when things get tough. The second is that Ansarullah will be able to continue punishing the Israeli regime more easily. And also, I think it teaches the United States a lesson. It may be a lesson that they don't take into consideration the way they should, but it teaches them a lesson that if they cannot defeat Ansarullah, then they should not even think about attacking him.
Ali, your response.
Well, I agree with all of that. What I want to add is to pay tribute to the people of Yemen who have sacrificed so much in solidarity and in defense of Gaza, to the point where truly Yemen now is the hope of forcing Israel to end this genocide, because all of the regional Arab regimes, the Europeans, the United States, are either completely passive or actively supporting this genocide. And Yemen has taken a stand to enforce a blockade on Israel to try to prevent it from continuing this horrific, escalating mass murder, this final solution that Israel has announced its intention to pursue in Gaza. And I think that the analysis that Trump backed down is absolutely the correct one. And as Dr. Marandi said, Yemen never wanted to pick a fight with the United States. They never said they were going to target American ships, except in response to US attacks on Yemen, which started in the current phase under the Biden administration. But of course, we know that Barack Obama first launched a genocidal war against Yemen, along with US proxies in the region, the Saudis and the Emiratis, in 2015, causing the worst humanitarian crisis in the world until the genocide in Gaza. And of course, the humanitarian crisis in Yemen continues and is likely to be worsened by the revenge attacks that Israel, apparently with some US backing, has been carrying out against Yemen, for example, attacking the port of Hodeidah in recent days, attacking equipment and infrastructure that is used to import food into the country. So this is the typical Israeli method of targeting the weakest, targeting civilians, because Israel is unable to engage with the people in the region. And so I'm sorry, Danny, I wasn't sure if I had lost you or...
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay, yeah. And what I also want to say, and I'm eager to hear Dr. Marandi's view on this as well, which he started to allude to, which is that US and Israeli interests are not always the same. And here I want to focus on a particular point. I think it's fair to say that the United States will do whatever it can to prevent Israel's outright defeat. We saw Joe Biden mobilizing multiple aircraft carriers and sending most of the US anti-missile batteries to the region, which were not very successful at defending Israel. I personally witnessed on October 1st last year, I was in Amman, Jordan, and I watched the sky light up with hundreds of ballistic missiles from Iran heading towards precisely targeted military and intelligence and terrorist targets in Israel. And it was very clear that that wave of missiles was not effectively stopped. I saw with my own eyes some interceptions, but they were very few compared with the sea, the river of missiles that was going overhead. And what we're told by Iran, and there's no reason to doubt this, is that this was only a fraction of what Iran was capable of. It was more than what Iran launched in April of last year, but much less than Iran is capable of launching should a full-scale exchange take place. We have to assume that the Yemeni missile, which hit Ben Gurion Airport or the direct vicinity of Ben Gurion Airport, which of course is one of the most heavily defended pieces of airspace on Earth, not just defended by Israel's own systems, the Iron Dome and the Arrow and David's Sling and all these different jointly developed US-Israeli systems, but presumably by US Patriots and THAAD missiles that are not just located in Israel itself, but in neighboring countries that are effectively allied with Israel as proxies of the United States. And so if that Yemeni missile could penetrate a single missile, so we're not talking about a situation where the Israeli air defense system was saturated with the missiles. We're talking about one missile that was able to get through all these defenses. Then there must be a sober realization in the Pentagon, in the White House, that were a full-scale exchange to take place between Iran and the United States that would involve Israel, that would involve the targeting of US proxies in the region, whether their military infrastructure or their oil infrastructure, would be catastrophic, would be would exact a price from the United States and the world economy. Dr. Marandi has talked about this many times, that the United States was not willing to bear. And so, to bring it back to Yemen in closing here, and forgive me for going on, remember that when Trump launched the attacks on Yemen, he explicitly said, this is a warning to Iran. So this was supposed to be a demonstration to Iran. Look what we're doing to Yemen, and you will be next. Well, you failed in Yemen, which presumably has a fraction of the capabilities of Iran. And so what does that tell us about the US willingness and capability to engage in a full-scale war with Iran, where it has no interest in doing so? The US has no interest in doing so. Only Israel and its fanatical supporters in the United States have an interest in doing that. And it seems that there's a sobering up in Washington that that war would be of no benefit to the United States. At least I hope that's the case.
Yeah, Lowkey, I want to get you in here and just show this first so you can react to it all. It says, this is the Times of Israel. They reported that during this announcement of the so-called truce with Ansar Allah, the strikes on Israel are going to continue, according to Ansar Allah. But this is the key thing. Israel was caught off guard, so reinforcing Ali's point. But I want to get your assessment of the situation, your reaction, Lowkey.
Well, an interesting context to all of this is that a few days ago, Mike Waltz, the former national security advisor, has been pushed out of his position due to what seems to be him going behind the Trump administration's back and working closely with Netanyahu on the purpose of persuading Trump to go to war with Iran, basically at the behest of Israel. So there seems to be some upset in the Trump administration with that, and that has led to Mike Waltz being pushed out of that position. On the other hand, what you have to also take into account is the other nations in the world who are targeted by US imperialism have watched carefully what these heroic fighters who represent ultimately the pinnacle of humanity today in Yemen. You are talking about the best of humanity. And when they were able to penetrate that Israeli airspace and strike Ben Gurion and go through the much vaunted THAAD defense systems from US arms companies, that is a lesson to all of the other governments that are targeted by imperialism in the world and by the US, that actually the saying, the mosquito can sting the lion's eye, or the knuckle of the tiger can be stung. You know, the United States is not all powerful and invincible in the way that it likes to portray itself. And ultimately here, you have an airspace that is also defended partially by the UAE. And I'll explain what I mean by that. The company that manages Israel's airspace is Highlander Aviation. That is an Israeli company, which is partly owned by Edge Group. That is a UAE state-owned arms company. So the myriad of forces at work here against the Palestinians, and actually the true role of the axis of assistance in this war will become clearer and clearer as time goes on. But of course, I would echo the points made so far, and also give my salutations to the people of Yemen, who, as Ali said, have gone through their own genocidal war. Over 300,000 of them killed in that war. The US are using the same target bank that the Saudis seem to use during that time. And we have seen the survivors of genocide reach out their arms to grab on to the current targets of genocide in Gaza. And it's a truly touching feeling to look upon these people who have just had civilian targets bombed in Yemen and saying very clearly to the United States, we will not let go of Gaza. You know, think about that. And that's not on the level of an imposed policy. That is an organic policy, which is felt by the people of Yemen. And also it's a notion which I would say is felt by a majority of humanity today. When I walk the streets on a day-to-day basis, I come across people and meet them from all walks of life, from all different professions, from all different political persuasions even now, who say very clearly that they are dead against this genocide. This is the high-tech Nakba that the Nakba of 1948 was a precursor to. This is Zionism boosted, turbo boosted with technological advancement. And what they're hoping to achieve in Gaza is a displacement of people at least double the size of the Palestinians displaced in the Nakba. We also have seen Israel transform really into a blatantly unambiguous imperial power in the region. When they can bomb a ship off the coast of Malta, they can bomb Lebanon, Yemen, and Syria all on the same day, Israel is undoubtedly an imperial power. Now, there are those who count themselves really among our number, would say, well, you know, it's Israel is a British and US attack dog. And of course, that has historical basis for what they are saying. But today, when you see the National Security Advisor essentially recruited as an asset of the Israelis in the US government, where is the activities of the British lobby within Israel today? What you have is a British embassy in what they call Israel. But guess what it has in it? It has in it something called the UK Israel Tech Hub. It's funded by the British government, but staffed entirely by former Israeli intelligence personnel and headed by the former Director General of the Israeli Finance Ministry. These are former Israeli intelligence personnel working inside the British embassy, inside the political entity of Israel. Their objective is to obtain public sector contracts in Britain for Israeli tech companies. And guess what some of those public sector contracts have been? The company that hacks phones in this country for the British police, Celebrite. The company that records conversations in the Irish police stations, Nice Systems. These are the companies that have spread out across different societies and done very well off the neoliberal era. So I think there needs to be a rethinking of what Israel is today and what it represents. We can no longer simply focus on the Balfour Declaration, the British Mandate, to understand what Israel is. It is an imperial beast as of today, and it is attempting to completely redraw the map with a new Sykes-Picot. And we have to be prepared for that and also be clear-eyed in our analysis of that.
Yeah, definitely, Professor Marandi, definitely want to bring you in. And it's a good point that Lowkey makes too. And I know Ali had a question for you directly, Professor Marandi. But the point, as all of this was happening with what Lowkey is saying, Israel was bombing Yemen. I mean, that Trump announced this pullback out of the bombing campaign while Israel was bombing Yemen, which I think, is part of this shock from the Israeli side, because Israel, I agree, Lowkey, Israel is acting and behaving more and more like an imperial power by the day. What's your thoughts?
Yes, I agree completely. Ali, what exactly was it that you wanted me to respond to?
Well, I'm just interested in hearing your view on the implications of Trump's announcement, and also to hear your view about what's happening in the US-Iran negotiations and how these things tie together.
Yeah, sure. I think that what happened in Yemen over the last few hours will have significant impact on the situation that we have in the region. And I agree completely with Ali and Lowkey that the people of Yemen are at the height of humanity, and the world is indebted to them. Of course, Hezbollah and the resistance across the region, they have all been heroic and they've all made huge sacrifices. But the victory today, I think, was very timely because Gaza is under enormous pressure, and the Israeli regime is attempting to escalate. And as Ali mentioned or stated earlier, it's their final solution that's now being implemented. So the victory that we saw is going to have consequences that I think we'll see in the future. I think that the pressure on Israel will increase. I think the removal of the National Security Advisor has significance, although I don't think there's going to be a major shift in U.S. policy. But I do think it is significant because, first and foremost, although many disagree with me, I do believe that the change in public opinion across the world will be a decisive factor in the future. The fact that Lowkey says that he walks down the street and sees people of all walks of life now opposing the Israeli regime, this is going to have consequences in the years to come, and that's really the reason why I think that the regime has no future, because it has been discredited everywhere. I just returned 3-4 days ago from China. I was in 3 different cities, and everywhere that I went, there was hostility towards the regime. Whereas a couple of years ago, this was not even something that people talked about. Most people didn't even know they didn't even know much about, if anything, about the Palestinian issue. Now everyone knows what's happening. Everyone has seen at least bits and pieces of the genocide. So this victory for Yemen, I think, will have a positive impact on the morale of the resistance. And I do think that there are things that we don't know about Yemen and about the axis of resistance, but we'll learn more about it in future. I believe that Yemen most probably has missiles that could strike the U.S. carrier. But Yemen, as the collective axis of resistance, is trying to weaken the Israeli regime through the policy that they were pursuing since day one, and that is death by 1,000 cuts. The intention, from my understanding, is not to lead to some third world war, but it is to constantly weaken the Israeli regime. Now, some may say that, well, Israel is now more powerful than it has ever been before. It has taken huge parts of Syria. It's ethnically carrying out ethnic cleansing in the West Bank at a pace we've never seen before. And in Gaza, they now are talking about the final solution and the full genocide of that Palestinian population. But I see things differently. I believe that as Ali saw in Jordan, there were I think a couple of hundred Iranian missiles that were fired into Promise 2. But to be very blunt, Promise 1 and 2 were basically Iran experimenting and learning about its own missiles. And this was the first time that Iran has actually used its missiles in combat, and Iran had never experienced US air defenses. And let there be no doubt, the real defenses of Israel are American. Even those joint projects, uh, they only exist because of American money and American support. But in any case, it's the Americans that do the heavy lifting. Iran tested multiple missiles, multiple drones. They combined the old and new so that they could get a better understanding of what the Americans have, what the Israeli regime has, and what the Iranians in future will need to do to improve their capabilities. And from my understanding, although I'm not privy to anything secret, uh, over the last few months, the Iranians have been working very hard on precision. So, for example, many of these missiles that are fired, they don't have to be very precise. If you fire a few missiles at a, let's say, electrical power plant, they will destroy the plant. They will bring it down. But if you want to target something very specific, a particular plane on a runway or a particular object, then precision needs to be greater. And my understanding is the Iranians have been working very hard on that. In addition to that, the Israeli regime carried out a major airstrike, which had limited success, and it was largely a failure, but it was very informative for the Iranians because they learned a lot about Israeli capabilities and American capabilities because these are all American jets. These are all American systems. And Iran has been preparing itself for potential conflict with the United States too. The United States may or may not carry out a strike on Iran. I see what Yemen is doing as an intelligence gathering operation, a very successful strike, which also shows that Yemen is testing these missile defense shields for the future. I believe that the Iranians and the Yemenis are working together, and that this knowledge goes to Iran and helps prepare it further. The Iranians, if they want to strike the Israeli regime, they can fire almost 2,000 missiles simultaneously. But now the Iranians, as I said, they're working, from my understanding, they're working hard for greater precision. And Iran is also beefing up air defenses, not just for the Israeli regime, but for the Americans. Now, some have a lot of, and I'm sort of straying away from the topic, but I think it is important because if we want to go into the nuclear negotiations, we have to see what sort of leverage the Americans have. The threats against Iran are obvious, what they're about. It's all about Israel. Because at the end of the day, the axis of resistance is dependent on, to a large degree, on Iranian material support and technical support. The heroism of Ansarullah, the heroism of Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Hezbollah and the resilient youth in the West Bank and those who sacrificed themselves from Jordan. All of these are, without them, we would not be, the Palestinian cause would have been gone. But the support that comes from Iran is what the Americans want to bring an end to. The issue really for the Americans is not so much the nuclear program as it is to end the resistance. So when the United States threatens Iran, this is not just a threat to the nuclear program. It is to intimidate Iran, to weaken Iran, to end Iran's support for the axis of resistance. And that's why Iran has to prepare itself for such circumstances. Now, the world has changed. The United States, and I'm sorry, I'll try to end swiftly.
Sure.
After the United States invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, Iran was surrounded. The United States basically had control of the Caucasus and Central Asia. Back then, Russia was weak. China was beginning to rise, but it was still, both of them were weak. That's how the Americans actually passed through sanctions against Iran. Back then, the Russians and the Chinese were not able to stand up to them. They only were able to water down the sanctions. So you had the Americans in Iraq and Afghanistan, you had bases surrounding Iran, and Iran began to develop these drones and missile capabilities and other capabilities to protect itself from the Americans. So this really began in 2003. But the objective for the Americans was to end the resistance. All U.S. policy in the region is based upon the needs of the Israeli regime. We saw Jeffrey Sachs make that speech in Cambridge, and then Trump even reposted himself. And obviously, he has access to the information. All of these policies are carried out at the behest of the Israeli regime, or in the interest of the Israeli regime, whether it's Libya, whether it was the dirty war in Syria, whether it was the invasion of Iraq, whether it was the genocidal war in Yemen or Afghanistan. All of these policies and more are focused on the needs of the Israeli regime, a broken region where the Israeli regime dominates. So gradually, Iran, the resistance, were able to push the Americans back. General Soleimani was key to the defeat of the United States in Afghanistan. He was key to the defeat of the United States in Iraq. And of course, they responded through terror groups like ISIS and Al Qaeda, which Turkey sadly, or Erdogan sadly, was deeply involved with. And so were others like Qatar. But he, of course, and the resistance, the general resistance, was able to push them back. Now the United States and back then, by the way, Iran, as I said, was much weaker. If you go and look at WikiLeaks, Arab dictatorships in the Persian Gulf region, some of them wanted an attack on Iran. They said, cut off the head of the snake, as they would say. But now let's look at the situation. These regimes do not want war. The the Minister of Defense of Saudi Arabia came to Iran with a message from the king, very positive message. Regardless of what their intentions are, Saudi Arabia does not want trouble. Neither do any of these other regimes. Of course, they are still assisting the Americans. Qatar, the Emirates, as was alluded to earlier, Bahrain, all of them right now are helping the Israelis bomb Yemen because they assist the U.S. Air Force. And without the U.S. Air Force, the Israelis cannot bomb Yemen. So they are directly helping the Americans bomb Yemen, and indirectly they're helping the Israelis bomb Yemen. But in any case, they don't want trouble with Iran. That's a big change. The Americans no longer have a ground presence in the region. There's no place for them to launch a war against Iran, they'd have to bring 1.5 million people. So invading Iran in a war like that is out of the question. All the Americans can do is bomb Iran, but they cannot use bases from the Persian Gulf region because that would be suicide for any of these regimes. So what can the Americans do? Either they have to fly over Syria and Iraq, which will be very difficult for a host of logistical reasons, but also it would cause a huge reaction in Iraq and probably the end of the U.S. presence there. The only real, as far as I understand, the only smart way to attack Iran would be from Diego Garcia. And that would be a 5,000-kilometer flight to Iran. And it would put American planes at risk. It would put the B-52 bombers and the B-2 bombers at risk. And Iran's air defenses, as I said, they are being beefed up as we speak. And so are Iranian missiles. So Iran is preparing itself for the worst, but it is also negotiating at the table. But by being strong, they're able to negotiate with strength. What are two small signs of that strength? Just like we saw how Yemen showed its strength by beating back the Americans. One is the very format of the format of the negotiations itself. Trump wanted direct negotiations. He insisted on direct negotiations. He didn't get them. They're indirect negotiations, just like under Biden. Under Biden, I was in Vienna during the negotiations. They were indirect. Trump insisted on the negotiations being in the Emirates, the United Arab Emirates. The Iranian, and he sent his message through the Emirates. The Iranians said Oman, and they rejected the Emirates. And the Americans had to accept that too. These may be to your audience not very important, but these are actually significant when it comes to the negotiating table. So I think that it's unclear if we're going to have a deal, but it is clear that Iran is talking from a position of strength. And I think we're also seeing signs of Trump's weaknesses of Trump. His weakness is not only clear in Yemen or at the negotiating table with Iran. I think his weakness was shown from the very beginning when he failed to bring an end to the war in Ukraine. He could have, with the momentum that he had, ended the war when he came to power, but he didn't. And I think that was a sign of his weakness. And now it's increasingly difficult for him to do so because he no longer has the momentum that he had before. And now we're seeing increasingly he's looking more and more like Biden. And Kellogg, he's talking as if he's Biden's representative. So contrary to the bluster that we see from Trump, I see him as a man who, a barbaric person, but a man who flip-flops and a man who's actually much weaker than he presents himself to.
Yeah, Ali, let's get you back in here. I just wanted to say that, I think we are seeing a lot of people assume, Israel's killing a lot of Palestinians, killing a lot of people in general in the region, is on this rampage. The United States is now just pulling out of Yemen, but has done great damage there. But that doesn't necessarily mean there's a certain kind of strength there. But overall, I think we're seeing some limits to both U.S. and Israeli power as imperial powers. What anything you want to react to with regard to Professor Marandi and this question?
Well, that's such an important point, and it's important to keep that in perspective when we look at developments in the region. It's hard to not have on our minds at all times just the horrific scenes, what we're seeing in Gaza now, the daily massacres, dozens of people every day. The latest figures from the health ministry in Gaza today that 59 people have been murdered by Israel just today by bombing, and that's typical every single day. And now people are dying of starvation. They're dying from chronic illnesses that are easily treated, but without medicine, without access to hospitals, they become fatal illnesses. They're dying from injuries that could otherwise be treated if they were either allowed to travel abroad for treatment or to receive adequate treatment within Gaza. This is a Holocaust in every meaning of the term. It's a Holocaust. That's not hyperbole. Listen to what the Israeli leaders themselves are saying, because all of this gets sugar-coated in Western media, which doesn't like to present its own people with the truth. But if you look at what the Israeli minister Bezalel Smotrich is saying, he's saying Gaza will be completely destroyed and the population will be concentrated in a small area. He's using the word concentrated. So when we talk about Gaza as a concentration camp, this is using the language of the Israeli leaders themselves. So Israel is capable of murdering tens of thousands of people. Perhaps hundreds of thousands of people have already been murdered in Gaza. It's capable of murdering thousands of people in Lebanon. It's capable of bombing Syria and murdering people there. And the Americans too, as we've seen, are capable of killing as many people as they want to kill. But that does not translate into power or strategic achievements. And a simple way to explain this is to ask, who won the Vietnam War? Who won the Vietnam War? Well, if we measure it by mass murder, it was a stunning American victory because they murdered millions of people. They murdered millions of people, and not just in Vietnam, but in Cambodia and Laos. Cambodia remains to this day the most bombed country in history, and those were American bombs. But nobody says that the US won the Vietnam War, or rather the American war on Vietnam. Everyone understands that Vietnam won its liberation from imperialism, first French imperialism and colonialism, and then American imperialism, at an extraordinarily high price, at a horrific price. But all of that killing did not result in an American victory. And it's important to say that so that we understand what we see, that the United States is a diminishing force in the region. It can no longer impose its will the way it once did. It's not at the height of its power. And Israel, as a barbaric genocidal extension of the West, is also diminishing in power. It could not impose its will on Lebanon. Of course, yes, we know Israel is still occupying Lebanese territory, but if we believed the propaganda of Israel and its supporters that we destroyed Hezbollah, we destroyed the resistance in Lebanon, then why didn't Israel drive all the way to Beirut and plant its flag there? Why didn't they occupy more of southern Lebanon? Because they can't, because they don't have the ability. Even now, as they threaten to escalate their Holocaust in Gaza, and Smotrich and other Israeli psychopathic ministers talk about and revel and celebrate destruction and killing and murder and bombing food warehouses and savagery and barbarism that the world can't begin to comprehend. Even as they do that, the Israeli army admits that when they call up reservists, they expect 30 to 50% not to show up. And maybe that's an underestimate. Maybe that's what they're willing to say publicly. So they're talking about going into Gaza and permanently occupying large areas. If they were able to do that, they would have done it. That was their plan already 18 months ago when they told us, oh, the operation could take up to a month. Well, now we're at 18 months. And during the ceasefire that lasted, or so-called ceasefire, because we know Israel never ceases firing, really. The Palestinians respected the ceasefire. Israel never does. From January 19th until March 18th, no Israeli soldiers were being killed in Gaza because they withdrew and the Palestinian resistance stopped firing at them. Once Israel started going back into populated areas in Gaza, the resistance started, the snipers, the ambushes began again, and Israel is taking heavy casualties again in Gaza. None of that has changed. The capability of the resistance in Gaza remains undiminished from what we can see. My colleague John Elmer covers this in great detail every week on the Electronic Intifada live stream. So tune in tomorrow for our regular live stream at noon Eastern time. That's on Thursday. And you'll see his analysis. And you'll see the operations being carried out by the resistance. And the more Israeli troops go in, the more will be injured or killed by the resistance. The more tanks will be blown up. The more armored personnel carriers will be blown up. So murdering babies, destroying hospitals, bombing food warehouses, burning alive journalists, all of the utter depravity of this Western-backed genocidal regime has neither broken the resistance nor broken the people. And that's a testament to them. I don't want to sit here and romanticize the people in Gaza and say, oh, they're superhuman. They're not superhuman. They're human. They're all too human. And yet, they have not surrendered. And there have been efforts. You remember a few weeks ago, there was all of this talk about, oh, there are anti-Hamas protests in Gaza. This was all astroturfed by a few families and clan leaders who never supported Hamas, who are always aligned with the collaborationist Palestinian Authority in Ramallah. And so, but there was a sort of a big PR effort to claim that there's now an uprising against Hamas in Gaza, as if people in Gaza don't understand that the cause of their suffering is not the resistance, it's not Hamas, it's Israel and its supporters and its collaborators. And I'm not accusing anyone in Gaza. I'm people there have all the right to think what they want and do what they want. But there was a propaganda effort coming from outside Gaza to astroturf these small number of people who were never supporters of Hamas and to claim that this is some broader uprising against Hamas. And of course, that's disappeared now. It totally failed because it was a PR push, or it was an effort to try to astroturf a bigger uprising to achieve what Israel has failed to achieve, which is the removal of Hamas as a popular movement and a resistance movement. And that totally failed. And I respect the right of people in Gaza to believe what they want, to support who they want. I'm talking about what I see, that of course there are people in Gaza who don't support Hamas, who never supported Hamas. That's their right. But the notion that there was this sudden uprising and people blaming Hamas instead of Israel was part of the effort to generate to generate victory for Israel where they have only found defeat and failure. And no number of TikTok videos of Israeli soldiers wearing the lingerie or the wedding dresses of Palestinian women they've forced out murdered is going to change that failure and transform it into a victory. And I just saw the news now. Yemen has imposed an aerial blockade on Israel. And that's what the missile in Ben Gurion did. And then the Israelis announced with great bravado, oh, the airport was closed for a few hours and then it reopened. Well, they can reopen Ben Gurion Airport all they want, but no planes are coming in. And until April, so we're talking about just a few weeks ago, most foreign airlines had canceled flights, canceled service to Israel. The vast majority of service was carried out by Israeli airlines and a few small European airlines. But most of the big carriers were not flying in and out. They only resumed those services on a regular basis a few weeks ago, and now they've stopped again. First, after the Yemeni missile operation, they said, oh, we're suspending flights for a few days. Now, major airlines, including British Airways, are announcing that they're suspending service at least until the middle of June. So you have to think about Israel demoralized, isolated, its economy is in collapse. Who is going to go and invest there? Who is going to go and build factories and businesses there? Who's going to go on vacation there other than, a few real extreme fanatics? And if you are an Israeli with a diploma and a foreign passport, you're going to be searching the job listings in countries that are going to be much safer for you and your family. And even the Israelis announced in their official statistics, record numbers of Israelis leaving and not returning. The experts we talked to at the Electronic Intifada live stream over the last few months, people like Shir Hever, say that these official figures represent probably only a fraction of the reality. But if the official figures are showing record numbers of Israelis leaving and not return, what must the real numbers be like? So what I'm saying is, if you look at the big picture, the utter horrors that Israel is committing, and which we must never stop talking about, never stop demanding an end to our government's complicity, never stop doing everything we can to protest them and to shame and hold accountable the officials in our governments who are enabling this. At the same time, that must not obscure for us the reality that this Zionist colonial project, this murderous implantation in our region, is on its way out.
Yeah, Lowkey, definitely want to get you in here. Any reactions to this? It makes me think, I feel like the United States has been experiencing Vietnam moment after moment in West Asia, but could this also be Israel's moment, even as brutal, as ugly as it is? But anything you want to react to?
When the IRA attempted to assassinate Margaret Thatcher in Brighton and was not successful, it said, we only have to be lucky once. You have to be lucky every time. Now, the basis of this aerial blockade of the Zionist entity is that just one ballistic missile can get through and debilitate life as normal for Israel. And this is the lesson from all of this, that these are movements which have very limited means, but have achieved massive changes and gains in terms of disorientating the Zionist entity and its ability to do what it does in the region. You have to remember that after 1948, the Palestinians were supposed to disappear. At the time of the Nakba, there were only a few million Palestinians in existence. Today, there's over 12 million of them in existence. And that is a testament to this idea that Israel can kill, but it cannot win. That the very essence of Zionism in targeting the weakest among populations in order to spread fear and panic and move human beings and impose a different physical space on those people is not successful in achieving the ultimate aim, which is the complete eradication of the Palestinians and the expansion of Israel into other places. One thing I thought of when Ali was talking about this attempt to astroturf some form of political change in Gaza was actually about a year and a half ago that Israel's favorite spy, Mahmoud Abbas, said he's going to go to Gaza. And he said it will either be Nasr or Shahada, that he'll either be victorious or he'll get killed in his heroic mission. And this was one of many attempts that the Israelis have launched to try and impose a different regime on the Palestinians living in Gaza. And it's been very, very clear that the population, by and large, support resistance against Israel. You're not going to defeat people in the way that Israel has attempted to, and ultimately dampen their spirits. We are talking about people who are inspirations for the rest of humanity in their ability to assert life. So ultimately, Israel is, as a political idea, committing suicide. These are the death spasms of the Zionist project. And of course, it is going for scorched earth. And it is becoming, in the rest of the world, and on a daily basis, a more and more clearly seen anti-human ideology. I remember in 2009, for us to speak clearly about Zionism was seen and frowned upon by many. And today, Zionism in and of itself is really akin to the most horrific and brutal ideologies which have existed in documented human history. And that is a perception which is actually widely held. The word Zionist now is absolutely unambiguously completely synonymous with genocide ethnic cleansing, and racism, the way we always said it was, the way it was from the very beginning. But now there is a widely held conviction on this issue among, I would say, a majority of humanity. And moreover, a majority of humanity are in support of resistance against it in a way that they have never, ever been before. And that is, as Professor Marandi said, it will be a decisive factor in the generations going forward. What you have done during this time will serve for future generations of your own family as either a mark of shame or a mark of pride. If they can look back and say that you played, it will be akin to those that look back and had relatives that were involved in all manner of extermination of people across the global south. The future generations of those families hang their heads in shame. They wish to disown their forefathers and their foremothers for the crimes that they committed. What is this arrogance that this implant in the region thinks that it's different from any other of the historical examples? Where does this arrogance come from to have the perception that they are somehow an exception to the rule? When you kill human beings en masse, history does not smile upon your memory. And in that, there is a self-defeating loop that the Zionist project is in, and it would always spiral in this direction. So I absolutely agree with what Ali just said.
Well, Professor Marandi, same question to you then. You know, is this the Vietnam moment for Israel, which by extension is also of the United States? Anything you want to follow up with Lowkey said and Ali?
I think this is far worse than Vietnam for the Israeli regime. I believe that this is the beginning of the end. I have no doubt personally that the regime will not last. The United States was defeated in Vietnam, and it changed the United States until, sadly, Saddam Hussein foolishly invaded Kuwait and gave the United States an excuse at a time when the Eastern Bloc collapsed to defeat his army. He didn't fight, and he didn't allow the army to fight either. And the United States, as a result of that victory, and as a result of the collapse of the Soviet Union, really dealt with the ghosts of Vietnam, and that made the United States far more arrogant. But after, for at least for a decade and a half, or a couple of decades after Vietnam, the United States was much more cautious in foreign policy. We saw that in Lebanon. We saw that elsewhere. So it had a huge impact on the United States. But this, I think, is far different. Let's look at this imperial power, or this tiny imperial power. Its only success was in Syria. It defeated it. It took huge swathes of land, and Syria has crumbled. But what else has it done? What has it caused? It is, in its arrogance, in its brutality, in its inability to think clearly, it has shown everyone that even if you submit, because the Syrian state, the Syrian regime, Jolani, is saying all the right things to appease the Israeli regime and the Americans. Have they removed the sanctions? No. What have the Israelis done? They continue to bomb the country. So it shows that if you quit the resistance, if you give up your arms, if you lose your arms, that doesn't matter. The regime will continue to strike. It will break your country into pieces. What is the result of that? And let's look at Lebanon. Sheikh Naim Qasim said very clearly, Hezbollah will not give up its arms. What happened after that? In the local elections, which I'm sure Ali has covered and Lowkey knows better than I, they swept the board in all the areas, in all the places that they contested. The resistance won the elections in all the areas where it was held. So despite the pressure from the Arab regimes that are supporting the current government in Beirut, despite the pressure coming from the West, and despite the fact that the Israeli regime is constantly murdering people in Lebanon. Yesterday, they murdered a member of Hezbollah. Today, they murdered a member of Hamas. They're violating the ceasefire. That shows also the truth about the United States. The United States is the guarantor of the ceasefire. The Israeli regime requested the ceasefire in Lebanon, and the United States was the guarantor. But the regime murders people, and the United States does nothing. There's no protection. So what does that prove? It proves that people in Lebanon, they continue to stand with the resistance. And the logic of the resistance today is stronger than it was ever before. Syria has proven that. The violations in Lebanon have proven that. The role of the guarantor has proven that. And Hezbollah is rearming. It's rebuilding as we speak. I can tell you that with confidence. The Israeli regime has overextended itself. In Syria, it's taking land, and it hasn't been able to leave northern Palestine alongside the Lebanese border, and now it wants to expand the operations. It's genocide, it's the Holocaust in Gaza. This is not. This is very difficult for the regime, as Ali was saying. The soldiers, those who've been fighting, many of them are not going to come back, and those who have come back are the morale is much lower than when it was a year and a half ago. Many lives have been destroyed, many businesses have been destroyed, and the regime, of course, is despised across the world. This, I think, is the most important thing of all. That Israel, which used to be a regime which commanded respect, not because it was good, but because Western narratives dominated the world. A couple of years ago in China, I gave you the example of China. A couple of years ago in China, most people had no idea what was going on in Palestine. It was far away. And those who knew a bit, some of them were pro-Palestinian, some were pro-Israel. Those who were pro-Israel basically knew Israel as a country that was technologically advanced. It didn't know that ordinary people didn't know much about the regime. Now people across the world know, thanks to the heroic work of Electronic Intifada, artists like Lowkey, yourself, others, Jews, American Jews, and in the Electronic Intifada, in Gray Zone, and across the board, young people, university students from all
Be
faiths and
careful with
walks
your
of life.
praise, Dr. Marandi, although it's much appreciated. Now will be called Iranian-backed.
No, I condemn you simultaneously.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Your condemnation is much appreciated.
So, so I really believe that the tide has turned. And let's look at the Israeli regime in Gaza, as I think Lowkey was saying, they were supposed to take Gaza in a month. Maybe Ali said it. We're approaching 19 months now, if I'm not mistaken. What have they done? Have they defeated the resistance? Hamas is still putting out footage. Islamic Jihad is still putting out footage. And we saw this major victory in Yemen. And also, as I said, as I wanted to allude to, look at the United States. The mood inside the United States is shifting. Young people are growing aware of the reality. People are waking up. If things like this are shifting in the United States, imagine how it is in the rest of the world, where people have more exposure to the truth. So, the United States is now, due to the foolishness of Trump, it's now confronting literally the world. It's a trade war. It's a trade war with China. It's a trade war with its own allies. It's antagonized Canada. It has antagonized Europe. It is continuing the war with Russia. This is all depleting the energy of the United States. It is fighting multiple wars whether hot wars or cold wars or economic wars on multiple fronts. And we know that the Israeli regime is dependent on the power of the West. It's not a strong regime. Everything it has comes from the West. Even those missiles that were discussed earlier, the Iron Dome. Without the United States, there is no Iron Dome. That's where the money comes from for the research. That's how the Americans are behind the development. Everything that the Israeli regime has comes from the United States. A weaker United States is not good for the regime. And the Red Sea is a sign of that. So I believe, and one final point, and that is look at the mood in the region. The Minister of Defense of Saudi Arabia comes to Iran and condemns the Israeli regime. For whatever reason it is, it shows that it is not good for anyone in this region to be seen as friendly to the regime. This will have consequences. Each extra day of genocide, each day that this Holocaust continues, there will be more hatred entrenched for the racism and for the brutality of this regime. The hatred will become deepened, both in this region and beyond. So I do not see this regime as surviving. I'm not saying that it will die tomorrow or next year, but I think it will collapse. And you see the internal struggle as well. It's something that we don't hear about very often. But if people follow the Hebrew press, and I'm sure the Electronic Intifada covers this extensively, you see that the divide in the regime is very deep. There are two Israels. It's the liberal Israel, which is just a genocidal, and it is the right-wing religious fanatical in a different way. But they hate each other. And this divide is also going to have consequences. So despite the bloodshed, despite the death and this, just today, I think we all saw the footage of another massacre. Over 25 people, I think, were murdered near a restaurant in Gaza. Children, entire families slaughtered, kids slaughtered, a young boy selling coffee to people to survive, to help his family survive, just murdered. That was just one instance. It's happening every day. It's happening 24 hours a day. Each and every one of these crimes is accumulating the hatred for the regime, and it is causing the hatred to have greater depth. The hatred towards this fanatical regime is something that I believe will not be reversed.
Yeah, gentlemen, I had one more question. Ali, I still see you're here. I know you had some time constraints. Do you want to stick around? How do you want to?
I can stick around for one more question, but I also wanted to say something else, if I may.
Go ahead.
Because today, Al-Julani, or Ahmed al-Shara, the so-called president of Syria, is being welcomed in Paris. Now, the symbolism of this, to me, is so shocking because Al-Julani, as we know, although the Western media want to completely memory hole it, was a former senior leader of ISIS, who we're told is the enemy of humanity. And I don't know if former is the right word. They say former, but this is just about 10 years, almost 10 years after the horrific Bataclan massacre and the attacks in Paris, which were attributed to ISIS. So we now have a former ISIS leader, or we're told he's former, being welcomed at the Élysée Palace by Emmanuel Macron. And in their press conference, Al-Julani, Al-Shara, or whatever his name is, so little is known about who he really is. Perhaps the Western intelligence services know who he really is, since
they know.
they have more contact with him than anyone else. But Al-Shara confirmed the reports that came out earlier today or yesterday that his regime is in so-called indirect talks with Israel. And this is part of their effort to continually appease Israel in the hope that they'll get something. Because the Syrian project, the Syrian dirty war, let's think about the basis of that. What we were told for year after year after year is that, no, this isn't targeting Syria, this is targeting the evil Assad regime. And once the evil Assad regime is gone, then it will all be, flowers and cupcakes in Syria. The sanctions will be lifted, and Syria will be rebuilt, and Turkish companies which are very capable. Turkey has a really, to their credit, fantastic construction industry, infrastructure, manufacturing. They'll all come in. They'll be funded by $500 billion in Gulf money to rebuild Syria, and it will all happen very quickly. You just have to get rid of Assad. That's what we were told. So the Assad government, the word regime is only reserved for official enemies of the West. Notice now, and I'm just going on a bit of a tangent here, but a bit of a media criticism. Now the New York Times and the Washington Post refer to the Syrian government when they talk about Shara. They only ever referred to the Assad regime previously. So I'm using the word government very deliberately here. So once the Assad government fell in December, Israel, of course, as Dr. Marandi said, expanded its aggression against Syria. It didn't say, okay, Assad is gone, and now, they expanded their aggression. They targeted the Syrian state that belongs to the Syrian people. Assad was gone. He was already gone out of the country. They escalated their attacks. Were the sanctions lifted? No, of course not. Now the conditions are you have to surrender even more to the West and to Israel before we'll even think of lifting sanctions. So the model for Syria and for all the countries of the region, for Lebanon, for Jordan, for the Palestinians, is to be a version of the Palestinian Authority. That's the best any country can hope to have. A local proxy, a local sort of puppet leadership that is well behaved, that does the bidding of the Israelis, that protects Israel, and exchange is allowed to extract whatever crumbs and wealth it can from its own people while policing them on behalf of Israel. So that's the best Syrians can hope for. Not sovereignty, not independence, not reconstruction, but let's call it a Syrian authority like the Palestinian Authority. And that's what they want in Lebanon. They want those who talk about sovereignty in Lebanon, that the Lebanon's sovereignty has to be restored by getting rid of so-called militias like Hezbollah and putting all the weapons into the hands of the state. But it's a state that is to serve as a proxy for Israel, to defend Israel against Lebanese resistance, and to serve Israel and the United States, not a truly independent or sovereign state. So that's the model for the region. And while they've had some success in Syria by overthrowing the government, I don't think they're going to be able to impose such a collaborationist leadership on the Syrian people. The Syrian people, we still have great faith in them because the Syrian people always stood for their own sovereignty and independence and for the liberation of Palestine, understanding that the two are linked. But also look at the bankruptcy of Western policy. It's so vile and so transparent that they're ready to welcome a literal ISIS leader to Paris or Berlin or London or wherever he's going next. I don't know. Perhaps he'll be coming to Washington. Who knows?
That was the rumor. That was the rumor. But
so they will welcome an ISIS leader as long as he's pro-Israel. But while at the same time, Palestinian leaders who merely defend their people and their land and their country are considered, anathema and the top terrorists of the world simply for resisting the destruction of their people, simply for resisting a Holocaust. And it's shocking to me that in France, And this is true across Europe. In France right now, the voices speaking out against bringing this ISIS leader to Paris and giving him this photo op at the Elysee Palace is the far right, is Marine Le Pen, someone who I abhor politically. I find absolutely disgusting. But this is the bankruptcy of Western politics now, that the so-called center is actually where the extremism is in most cases. And this is why we're also seeing this collapse and this rot in Western societies, this complete disillusionment with the political system and the mainstream parties, and a growing crisis in these societies. And it ties back to a large extent to their ongoing depraved imperial interventions in Southwest Asia, in Africa, of course, where France has been deeply mired for many centuries and never gave up its colonies. It just changed the name of the relationship, but it's now thankfully being kicked out. And so people in the West need to understand that liberation for Palestine, getting the United States and the Western powers out of the affairs of other people, stopping their meddling in their regime change wars, whether it's the constant attempts to overthrow the government of Iran. I may love or hate the government of Iran. Dr. Marandi may love or hate the government of Iran. I don't know. Clearly, Iran is a society with many diverse political views. We can see that actually there's probably more debate in the Mejlis, the Iranian parliament, than there is in the United States Congress on many important issues. But that's none of our business. Who governs Iran is not our business. That's the business for the Iranian people. It's not the business for Western financed regime change wars and color revolutions being waged all over the world. And so what people in the West need to understand is that getting their countries out of these quagmires, stopping this meddling, and liberating Palestine is actually liberation for them as well.
Mm. Yeah, gentlemen. Yeah, I do have one final question. It may take 15 or 20 minutes. Are you okay with that? Ali, I know you said you had some time constraints. Are you all right?
I can do 15 minutes for sure.
Yeah, it'll be
I should just talk less. That's what I should do.
No, I want all of you to talk as much as you all want. I appreciate all the, the
I've been talking the most, I think.
Well, all the insights have been appreciated from everybody. So, I mean, the final question here that I had out, let's begin with you, Lowkey, is this. One of what I've noticed, whether it's with, what Ansar Allah has been doing and has done and is going to continue to do, especially vis-a-vis Israel, standing up to Israel on behalf of Gaza, whether it's what's been going on between the U.S. and Iran, and of course Israel and Iran, what's happening in Gaza itself, in the entire situation in West Asia, kind of reflects a kind of a contending issue I see, which is, on the one hand, many people, especially in the West, are infected with this deep pessimism. On the one hand, it's understandable because the crimes that have been committed in Gaza, the genocidal crimes, can't be hidden. And on the other hand, that we hear all the time how weak the resistance is, how weak Iran is. Many people believe that Iran is going to fall, or it's going to capitulate to the West, or it's working with the West in these negotiations are a sign of weakness. There's many thoughts that the resistance is, Gaza is gone, even though we could say that definitely infrastructure-wise and the horrific pain of the people, the resistance is still very much there, but it doesn't get as much attention. So maybe, Lowkey, if you could help us understand this dynamic. And, a lot of people might say that this channel sniffs a lot of what the kids would say hopium. But I think actually the resistance that we're seeing worldwide to empire, which spans beyond West Asia, but is very deep now in West Asia because of what's going on, I think it's very real, and it's having just huge changes, a huge impact on the changes occurring in the world. So wherever you want to take that.
So I would say, for those outside of Palestine, this form of organized despair is an excuse for inaction. And actually, when you look at those, of course, Yemen being the pinnacle and the leader in this way, but when you look at those that have organized effectively, when you look at the achievements of Palestine Action, for example, you are talking about over 500 operations against Israeli arms factories and companies which do business with them and support them over the last 5 years. That's led to 3 Israeli arms factories, well, 2 Israeli arms factories, 1 Israeli office of Elbit Systems shutting down permanently. That has led to billions of pounds lost in contracts. That has led to over 10 companies cutting ties with Elbit Systems. And you are talking about a movement that is not backed by any foreign state or entity, which has now spread across the world to even the United States, where Palestine Action was able to obtain the closure of an Elbit Systems site in Boston, Massachusetts, spread to Spain and across European countries also. We don't have the time for wallowing in despair outside of Palestine, outside of Gaza. Those of us who are here and have our full faculties, the use of our mental faculties, must use every single fiber in our beings to fight this beast. And yes, the victories are incremental. And yes, the victories in the moment seem small. But it is those micro victories which then influence the macro in a longer war of attrition. And anyone, and I say this very, very clearly, anyone with anything negative to say about what Iran has done for the Palestinian cause is either wittingly or unwittingly an agent of the Israelis at this stage. There are 2 sides. There are 2 sides. You are talking about a state that has given more to the Palestinian cause than any other state. And I'm talking materially. I'm not talking metaphorically. I'm not talking spiritually. I'm talking materially. They talk about the Palestinian revolution going from al-Hajar al-Miqla', and then it went to a Sawarikh. How was that quantum leap possible? And when people actually sit down and analyze the history and look at how that happened, and that is in no way taking away agency from the heroes of Palestine who have written their name in the stars. But when they examine in a material way how all of that happened, the legacy of what Iran has done vis-a-vis the Palestinians will become clear, away from these, frankly, Zionistic movements. When we look at Daesh, we are talking about a sectarian, inverted mirror image of Zionism, which attacks the mosaic of the people in the region and seeks to smash that mosaic into a million pieces. Those are the ones that history will not look kindly upon. But those who have contributed everything they have and given blood for Palestine, it's those whose opinion is important in my view.
Yeah, Professor Marandi, please, wherever you want to take the question that I had, whatever you'd like to contribute.
I don't believe that despair is useful nor a solution. Anyone who spreads despair is only hurting the cause. And the Palestinian people, we saw how the United States and the Europeans, they cooperated with the Israelis as they starved the people of Palestine, as they continue to do so. And what is the starvation for, partially? Not just so in the long run to wipe out the population, but it was also to create this uprising against Hamas and the resistance. And it failed. The situation in Gaza is horrific. It's beyond our imagination. What we see is painful enough, and we're not even there. We haven't even spent a minute in that part of the world. Yet the Palestinian people continue to remain steadfast. They try to impose this pressure so that people rise up, and those people who protested against Hamas, they turned out to be a small number. But the Western media tried to inflate their numbers to make it look as if, so they strangle people, bring them to their knees, and then when a number of them protest, they say, look, people hate what we are opposed to. They use the same model in Syria, they use the same model in Cuba, they use the same model in Nicaragua and in Venezuela. They destroyed the Venezuelan economy, and then they say, look, socialism doesn't work. They put their boots on the necks of the Venezuelan people and say, look, the model works. Regardless of whether you're a socialist or not, you cannot strangle a country and then say that it's mismanaging their affairs. So the West tries to strangle the people of Gaza, yet the people of Gaza still remain steadfast. And so we have no justification for despair. Those of us outside of Gaza, how can we have despair when people in Gaza are steadfast? For the most part, at least, they're steadfast. And there are signs of success. Again, I don't want to say too much because Ali points out that, of course, I was born in the United States, but it doesn't count for anything nowadays. But Americans are waking up. Young Jews are at the forefront of the resistance against genocide and this Holocaust. There's a sea change. I'm not saying the majority of all people of all faiths and all age groups have joined the resistance, but the change is dramatic. The change across the world is dramatic, and the change in the United States is enormous. Thus, the policies towards TikTok, thus the censorship in Facebook, Instagram, Meta in general, and Twitter. It's all about keeping people ill-informed, but they're failing. This is the bigger picture. The bigger picture is that the world is waking up. The world is seeing the reality. That's what we want more than anything else. We want people to recognize that the Palestinian people have been crushed, that they've been humiliated for decades, and people now see that. Before, people had very little knowledge about the Nakba. Very few people even knew what it was. Very people even knew what Gaza was. Now people across the world know this. This is something that, by the way, brought an end to Vietnam, because I think Ali spoke about Vietnam. Vietnam initially was supported overwhelmingly by Americans. And people like Muhammad Ali, who became very famous, he was despised for opposing the Vietnam War and refraining from joining the army. People hated him for it. He wasn't some popular person where everyone they said he's a traitor. But gradually, as the body bags began to come back, as the situation in Vietnam continued, more young people began to read about Vietnam, the history of Vietnam, about Ho Chi Minh himself, and they started to see through the propaganda. And by the end of Vietnam, the United States had been divided. Most people were not necessarily against the Vietnam War, but the nation was divided, and thus the regime could not continue the war. Today, we see an awakening across the world that goes far beyond Vietnam, especially with the new technologies. Awareness is today, I think, is very high, and we're seeing the genocide being carried out. This is an unprecedented crime against humanity, not because of the numbers, but because it's being carried out in front of us, and they won't stop. People see this. People are waking up. The resistance is alive, whether it's in Lebanon, maybe in Syria, we'll wait and see. In Yemen, it's a huge victory, Yemen. But even if resistance was not alive, which it is, even if the world was asleep, which it's not, we have a responsibility as human beings to be steadfast. We have a responsibility to continue pushing for human equality in Palestine, an end to ethno-supremacism. That's our responsibility. It doesn't matter if we're succeeding or failing. We have responsibilities. That's our job. So while I'm optimistic, while I see a lot of successes, despite all the pain, but we have a responsibility anyhow. It doesn't matter if we're winning or losing. If we're on the right side of history, good for us. If we're not, then we have failed ourselves. And it doesn't, and I'm not talking about supporting the genocide. I'm talking about those of us who are silent. We all have to be active. We all have to be more active. I have to be more active. Everyone has to be more active, whether online or offline, in any way or form possible, to create greater awareness, to put greater pressure on the regime, to put greater pressure on the supporters of the regime. And I have no doubt that ultimately liberation will come.
Ali, take us home. Lowkey, I think, had to go because of technical reasons. So, but I just wanted to say that in case people were wondering. But Ali, take us home and we can conclude.
I mean, despair is a luxury that we can't afford. I put it that way. Sadness, yes. Pain, yes. We feel great, constant sadness, pain at what we see, at what we hear, at what our colleagues and friends and loved ones tell us about what they're experiencing in Gaza. We're never free from that pain, from that sadness, but we can't let that turn us to despair. We have to, for example, there's 10,000 people watching this stream right now, and hopefully tens and hundreds of thousands and more will watch it once it's completed. And if each one of those people does one small action every day, that by itself is something. And not everyone can, because you can't. Nobody is saying pick up a weapon and go to Palestine and fight. Absolutely, no one is saying that. But that doesn't mean you can't send an email to your representative, to your government, to whoever it is, to your TV station. These things feel small, but they help to create an atmosphere where it's okay to speak openly about Palestine, because the Zionists want to create a situation where everyone is terrified to speak. And it's a sign of their failure that they're arresting students and deporting students like Mahmoud Khalil and Mohsen Mahdawi and Rameisa Ozturk here in the United States. And there have been similar cases in Germany and the UK where there's a brutal crackdown on journalists. The so-called free speech of the West. I experienced it myself. I experienced the hospitality of the Swiss government, supposedly one of the most democratic in the world, for the crime of coming to speak about the genocide. I was kidnapped off the street before I could speak to prevent me talking about the genocide. Now, you can imagine if that had happened in Iran or in Russia or in China, what the discourse about that would be, kidnapping journalists and throwing them in prison for their opinions. And yet I will continue to speak out. I won't be intimidated in that. And there are people who have experienced far, 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 far worse than I did, and who are still speaking out and who won't be silenced. And so that's what we have to do. And every time I talk to friends and colleagues in Gaza, they tell us that what keeps us going, they say, I mean, we had one of our colleagues, Ruwaida Amir, an incredible journalist. She was on the Electronic Intifada live stream last week, and that interview is on the Electronic Intifada YouTube channel. I urge people to see it. But one thing Ruwaida said that really haunts me, she said she's lived through all the Israeli wars, including 2014, which was a massacre of unprecedented barbarity at the time. And she said nothing compares to what we're going through now. She said we in Gaza don't even have words to describe what we're going through now. But what she tells us, and what everyone I talk to in Gaza tells us, that the one thing that keeps them going is when they see and hear the rest of the world talking about them. So don't shut up about Gaza. Don't let people silence you about Gaza. Don't let it go off the front pages. Use whatever platform you have. If it's your Twitter account with 20 followers, that's fine. Share stories, share the reality about Gaza. Write to your members of parliament or your legislators, not because I think it's going to turn them into courageous superheroes, but so that they know what people are thinking, and that they know that when they do finally get a spine and a backbone, it's okay. It'll be safe for them to speak out. We are the ones who will create that change, which, as Dr. Marandi said, is already happening. Now, for the first time, that Pew Research Center poll that came out in the United States last month showed for the first time a majority of all Americans view Israel negatively. And this is despite all the censorship, all the thuggery, all the billions spent to brainwash and propagandize people, and it's failing. And it's failing because of us, all of us, and we have to keep up.
Well, this has been a great live stream. Thanks so much, Professor Marandi. Thanks so much, Ali. I want to, of course, all of us want to thank Lowkey. He had to go, but of course, his contributions always welcomed here. I want to thank everyone who tuned in today. Please do hit the like button before you go. That helps, as Ali said.
Especially since it's your birthday, they should all hit the like button.
Yes, this is true. You can
happy birthday, Danny, and thank you today and every day for all the work you do to educate and inform so many people. It's absolutely vital.
I appreciate that, Ali and Professor Marandi. Everybody, you can find the links. You can find Electronic Intifada, Ali Abunimah's, where he is an editor of, and they have a great staff. Definitely do go there. Subscribe.
The place which I condemn, by the way, I condemn it once again.
Thank you for your.
We
appreciate your condemnation.
Electronic Intifada is not an Iranian. It's not an. There's no Assadist equivalent, I guess.
We're going to start every interview now. Do you condemn the Electronic Intifada?
Yeah. So everyone go subscribe there, and definitely support them any way that you can. You can also find Professor Marandi's Twitter. You can find Lowkey's Twitter. I think he's touring in September. So if you're in the UK area, definitely support Lowkey's music and go see his concerts because it's incredible. In the video description is all the places you can support this work, Patreon, Substack, and there are many other options. Now, this is going to be the last live stream for a while because I'm actually heading out east to China for a bit, and then I'll be back late in the month. So be on the lookout for content that'll be coming out here. If you missed this stream and other streams, content will be coming out here, and then also content from out there. So without further ado, gentlemen, any last words before we head out of here?
Safe travels, and hope to see you and speak to you all again soon.
Yeah,
Dr. Marandi and Lowkey as well.
Well, we'll head out of here
on the show.
Yeah, we'll head out of here together. Everybody, hit that like button. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll have to do this again soon. Bye-bye.